Hey, I'm AC Lockyer, the professional business guide, and we're here at a town center in Anywhere, USA, and we're doing man-on-the-street interviews about what are apples-to-apples comparisons. Question, have you ever heard the term apples-to-apples comparison?
Sure.
Always. Many times.
No, I've never heard that phrase before.
No.
You've never heard that before. Have you ever heard the phrase making an apples-to-apples comparison?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you ever heard the phrase making an apples-to-apples comparison?
No, I haven't.
You haven't? And here's an apple.
Okay.
Explain the concept of an apples-to-apples comparison using those apples.
Okay, if I'm comparing these two apples, I'm comparing these two delightful fruits, and to me, they're exactly the same.
A very good one because it's red delicious and red delicious.
Red. Okay, so if you were comparing apples to apples right now, and you had two apples in front of you, how would you be comparing them?
By the color?
By the color?
Yeah. One's darker than the other.
That you would have to compare exactly the same thing right down the line. So everything would have to line up exactly to, get the right, comparison.
You've got similar items.
They're the same.
They're the same.
They're both red.
They're both red.
They both look good.
They both look good.
Same shape, same color, same variety. What more do I say about these lovely apples than that?
So have you ever heard of making an apples to orange comparison?
It's very difficult.
Now, have you ever heard the phrase making an apples to oranges comparison?
No, I haven't.
Have you ever heard somebody talk about making an apples and oranges comparison?
Yes.
Okay. So how would you compare an apple and an orange?
Color, taste, texture. They grow on different trees.
They're not alike. It's not the same. There's no comparison.
There's no comparison.
Way up the chain maybe, but further back up, fruit to fruit. I could do it by the color, by the size, by the taste.
They're just two different items, two different things.
Have you ever heard of the phrase comparing apples to oranges?
I have heard of that phrase, yes.
So how would you describe that?
Okay, I'd say that's where two items are superficially the same, but actually quite different in terms of what they're like. They have some similarities, and so somebody might superficially say they're similar, but in reality they're quite different. So different color, different shape, different type of fruit.
Have you ever heard the phrase an apple to pear comparison?
Never.
So what would the pear be? Do you know what to do with a pear?
I eat it.
Have you ever heard the phrase making an apples to pears comparison?
No.
You have not.
Haven't.
Have you ever heard of an apples to pears comparison?
Not before, no. I've never heard of that comparison.
They both got different shapes, different color, different texture, and probably different taste.
So have you ever heard the phrase making an apples and pears comparison?
No.
Then I probably want an apples to pear comparison where I've got a real alternative, a real choice, not just a I don't really want a superficial difference between the two. Apples to oranges may well be sufficient some of the time, but apples to pear gives me a real alternative.
I'd rather be a pear. I'm a pear person. Okay? Well, it's got to be a mushy one.
But it's got a pear.
I'm a pear person. Jesus, that's hard.
I would consider myself a pear person.
Well, we just got done doing our man on the street interviews here, and it's just incredible some of the things you learn when you talk to people on the streets. As we talked to people about making apples to apples comparisons, they would look at the apple and they'd go ahead and they'd get the second apple in their hand and they'd say, well, some people would immediately compare the two and say, well, they're both red, they're both somewhat round, they're both the same texture, they're both apples, and most everybody would say they're both fruit, and they could easily say these are very, very similar or both exactly alike. So making an apples to apples comparison was easy for people to make. Then we brought into the equation the orange. And people generally had heard of making an apples to orange comparison. Some people hadn't. It was interesting to see generationally that some people had heard of apples to apples, and some people had even heard of making an apples to orange comparison. And they'd look at them and they'd say, well, they're both fruit and they're both somewhat round. One's red, one's orange. One's going to have a texture and the other one's going to have a different texture. And they could clearly identify that although they were both fruit, that there was a difference between an apple and an orange. And then, of course, we further changed the paradigm and we introduced the pear. And when they saw the pear, they were even more able to make differentiating choices or descriptions or comparisons between the apple and between the pear. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to show small business owners across the country that in order for you to differentiate yourself and get people to start looking at things a little differently in your company, sometimes you have to make an apples to pear comparison. And nobody had ever heard of the phrase making an apples to pear comparison. And when they'd start to judge the differences between the apple and the pear, they'd say, well, the shape is even much different. The color is much different. They're both fruit. But there were even more differences between an apple and a pear. And you see, service businesses are fruit. Whether you're a carpet cleaner, a window cleaner, a janitorial service company, power washing company, soft washing company, landscaping, whatever you do, service businesses are like fruit. Some you can apples to apples compare. Some you can apples to orange compare because there are differences, but they're not as big. But what you want to be in your service business is you want to be the pear, because the pear is so different that it elicits the question, why are you so different? This is AC Lockyer, the Professional Business Guide. Good luck, good business, and prosper.